How you doing?
That's cool. Yeah, I'm in the nice warmth of my studio in sunny Cornwall.
Brilliant. That one. Move on to the next one now. So,
It's is it raining in Manchester?
no, it's pretty. Yeah.
Beautiful sunshine, Andy.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, it's not.
Remember, I am from up north.
Yeah. How you doing?
That's cool. Yeah. Hey, Chris. Warmth of my studio in sunny Cornwall.
Brilliant.
I'm getting some weird feedback, but I can see Chris there.
Yeah, so we've got Chris with us, we've got Bob. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Yeah, it's good to have you guys on board. So yeah, it's pretty sunny here actually, which is a shame because there's not many times you organise a festival and pray for rain. So we've not been too lucky in that respect.
Yeah.
But that's the way it goes. Yeah, I think it's good to have you on board. So yeah, do you want to introduce yourself maybe for people on the stream who might not be familiar?
Yeah. So my name's Andy Hughes. I'm artist, photographer. I live in West Cornwall. Lived here for about 30 years.
Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself maybe for people on the?
I'm getting a bit of a feedback loop.
Yeah. Have you got the video open on another stream?
Andy Hughes. No, I'll mute Bob and I'll mute Chris and I'll mute. I live in West Cornwall. I think got some weird feedback going on.
Chris, are you able to mute your mics for me, please? I might be able to mute you myself. Yeah, we are. There we are. So that should be a bit better now.
It might be that the website is over as well, open as well as this Zoom. So that might be what it is that's causing.
Okay, right. Let me just make sure I haven't got any website. That sounds better. That's better.
Much better now.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So I came to Cornwall 30 years ago after studying fine art in Wales, and I learned to surf when I was in my 20s. And I suppose that's what got me involved in the whole sort of, current interest in plastic and pollution and waste in the ocean. So it's a pretty long history, really. So and I started making work about plastic 30 years ago. And of course now it's a mainstream big event that everyone's working on various solutions to help us stem the flow of one aspect of pollution. And of course, as an artist, I aligned myself over the past with various organizations. So I was a very early member of Surfers Against Sewage. I sort of, my practice really is making films and works of art, but where possible, I really try and help other organizations to communicate sometimes fairly complex thinking about how we feel about the environment, about the current sort of pollution crisis. That's what I kind of see I do, really. That makes sense.
Yes, spot on. Thanks for that. Yeah. I think what we were going to do is you showed me a video. We were going to show that. So you want to do that now, and then we'll play that.
Yeah. What we'll do is the film obviously you can find through your website and online if you just type in plastic scoop. If you type that in Google, you'll get lots of interesting, funny things like plastic scoops, of course. So the title, I tend to do that a lot with a lot of things I do. I give things weird titles. Whereas obviously in the world we live today, everyone's on social media, they're all using hashtags, and I tend to kind of like doing things that are slightly alternative. So the film lasts sort of 20 odd minutes. So what I did is just put a few clips together. So if you want to run that, it's just kind of a couple of minutes really. People might be able to watch it. That'd be great.
Let me have a look, see if this works. So it should be. So I'm playing that now.
Yeah, that's cool.
Is that?
Yeah, I can see that. Can't hear any sound though, but I can hear it. I can see it.
You can't hear the sound?
No.
Can you explain what it's about, Andy, and the link?
Yeah. If you let it run, I'll let it run, and I'll just kind of talk you through it. Really, it's frozen my end.
All right.
Maybe close it. Just start it again. Maybe.
Oh, hang on. That's because I paused it. I paused it.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. So I think obviously the sound's quite important, but what you're looking at here is at the moment you look at some clips that were made from the 1940s, and it's a bit like an Adam Curtis documentary. So basically, it uses gaming footage from Grand Theft Auto, and if anybody's watching this that are familiar with playing that particular game or those kinds of games on PlayStations, the last few years, though, a lot of games, particularly this game, have become very immersive. So they allow you to obviously play the game as one might play a computer game, but they also allow you to explore sometimes very vast landscapes. This particular landscape in this particular game is very rich with immersive visuals, all sorts of characters. Obviously, the film Grand Theft Auto has, over the past, received a lot of controversy because of the nature of the subject matter. But of course, one doesn't have to play a game in the way that maybe it was intended. And I think that's the interesting thing about arts and culture is there's a mainstream arts and culture, but often there are lots of us that work with, existing ideas in the arts, but we try and somehow reframe them. So I'm really reframing a game which many, many millions of people play and watch, and I'm reframing it and remaking this sort of film, which really talks about humanity's kind of folly into the issues that we deal with today in terms of climate change and pollution issues. It uses archive footage. It uses footage from NASA archives. For instance, this little clip here has a scientist who about 12 years ago was reading from one of the first papers that the United Nations were looking at in terms of reports about climate change and global heating. This is quite an interesting clip that I found from NASA from the 1960s. Today, we're all kind of interested in using mobile phones and digital technology. Not many of us really know that it was the military that were using the technology that we're using now for virtual reality. They were using it to explore the oceans in the 1950s and 60s. And when you actually start looking through the data, they weren't exploring the oceans undersea for, let's say, benign reasons. They were developing technologies for the Cold War. So, I've made use of all that kind of material and made something which, when people watch it, it's not meant to give you a literal reading of the subject. It allows people to sort of, almost like wander off in a dream state and think about the subject matter of pollution and environment in a much more abstract way, not in a linear way, not in a kind of way which, it's sort of solutions and problems. It's like being in a kind of dream state. Because I think we underestimate how, creativity and dreaming and philosophizing can really help us with a debate. I think we find a lot of discussions that are very practical, and I know we need those practical solutions. I've dipped in and out some of the talks today, with people talking about, farming and alternative methods, and all those things are really key, but we shouldn't underestimate the poetic. We shouldn't underestimate the capacity for humans all across the planet to think about the subject in ways that are not technical, in ways that are not technocratic, because that's what's going to solve the problem. It's not just, it's not just money. It's not just patents. It's not just, practical solutions. It's thinking, it's heartfelt solutions that we need to think about. If that makes sense. And that's that kind of what the film's about, really. I did just find something that I just want to read because it's really fascinating. So I was thinking about today, and I was in the studio, and I got this book a few months ago. It's called Novacene by James Lovelock. Now, James Lovelock, proposed the Gaia theory, and he's now, I think he's about 98 years old. So he's been thinking about this a long time, his whole life. James Lovelock was an amazing engineer, mathematician and engineer. So just thinking it's put into this subject that we're all here today to share. And you can read this book in literally 40 minutes. It's really easy to read. And some people might find it quite scary, but I read it and I thought it was very positive as well as quite disturbing. And I'm just gonna highlight a little thing that I'd not noticed. And so James Lovelock talks about this poet in America called Richard Brautigan, and I've never heard of him. And in the 1960s, he wrote a poem, and the poem was called "All Watched Over by Machines of a Loving Grace." I've never heard of it. So I looked it up and I read the poem on the internet. I would suggest people should go and have a look. It's a really interesting poem. I'm not going to read you the poem, but I'm going to summarize it because James Lovelock mentions what the poem is about. It's really fascinating. So basically, it goes like this. All watched over by machines of loving grace. It is a fantasy of a future in which there is a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in a mutually programming harmony. Humans become free of all our labors and are joined back to nature. Return to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of a loving grace. And that might be quite scary for a lot of people. We are not going to disinvent plastic. We are not going to disinvent scientists looking for the meanings of the universe. We're not going to disinvent nuclear power. That's not going to happen. So my sort of thinking about the future is we have to embrace obviously technology, and we have to think big. We have to think about the big picture. And this is why I think lots of artists and poets and scientists artists and poets, we like reading about science. We like reading about, solutions, but we also like sort of thinking about it in a way which is, let's say, slightly left field sometimes. And I think James Lovelock's hit something there. So, we're doing this now, aren't we? By technology, and when I'm playing that PlayStation game, I'm 54. People might think, what an hell is a 54-year-old playing a PlayStation game? Well, do you know what? Gaming is really fascinating. It's really interesting, and I think if you general person in the street might have this idea of gamers, sat in the bedrooms drinking, you know what I mean? Sort of like not participating in the world. It's more complex than that. I don't think it's that simple. I don't know if that makes any sense, or I'm rabbiting on.
No, I think that's fascinating. I think, yeah, like using sort of using the video game, I thought was such a novel idea. I think those video games are so sort of well made. They sort of kind of reflect life in a way. So using them as a canvas, as it were, to do that is a fascinating idea. And I think you touched on there. It's like speaking to people on different levels, and you can go out and shout at people to reduce their plastic consumption, but it's not always going to get through to people in the same way that talking to them on another level. Exactly. On another level might. So yeah, I thought it was interesting in that respect. Bob, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Andy. There's some really good stuff there, and I really like what you said about underestimating the poetic. That's really nice. I wrote that down. I'm keeping that. Yeah. That's very good. But yeah, no, it's a really good point about kind of to do with the climate crisis that we're all in, and everybody trying to find the place with it, you know, and a lot of people, you know, go through a range of emotions when it comes to climate change, and what can I possibly do about it all? I'm only one person, and all these kinds of things. And so there's all kinds of guilt and despair and all these sort of overwhelming emotions and all that kind of thing. And it's finding that place, isn't it? It's finding that sort of thing that you slot into, you know. And there's been a number of sort of studies on that and the emotional kind of responses of people. But what they found is that when they're brought into groups, then there's a lot of kind of language that comes out, which is, you know, we feel like this, and this is happening to us, and all this kind of thing. So it's about finding your own place within it, and there's definitely a space for it as far as the arts and, you know, creative expression and all those kinds of things, isn't there? And there's a lot of that in our arts and creative. And there's a story in there which one of the characters is called Gaia from James Lovelock. Yeah. But yeah, so was that why you chose Grand Theft Auto yourself? Because you saw it as a kind of, you know, it's obviously a very popular medium, and a lot of people can connect with it in that way. So was that what you were trying to do, is make that sort of?
Well, I kind of, the funny thing is I kind of, but you know what? It's like sometimes I hate using the word art because it's such a big word. It's a catch-all word. But you know, like the way you come to things, sometimes there's like, you know, these paths you have in your life, and you don't kind of know sometimes where you kind of end up. And I'm just writing something now at the moment about the film, and this academic was asking me to write about the same sort of question. And I was thinking, well, do you know what, really? This is going to sound really daft, but I just think one has to be honest. I mean, well, it was about 2002, and I'd got a PlayStation, I'd got a couple of games, and I was actually going to America to do my first, well, I've been photographing plastic on the beach for a long time, since the late 80s. And I had this opportunity to make a book and do various things. And I knew I needed to go to a place. And the place was California. And the reason I wanted to go to California is for obviously lots of reasons related to surf culture, but also because I knew that, you know, Los Angeles as a city, and the Californian coast, it's one of those places it's got everything we hate about the planet and everything we love about the planet. You know, it's got the birth of the kind of hippie movement. It's going to have some amazing solutions that are going to come from Silicon Valley. But at the same time, when you visit there, it's obscene at the same time. And I knew I needed to go. So before I went there, guess what I discovered? I thought, well, I'm going to be driving in California, and there's this game, and you can actually drive in America. You can drive these cars, and you can drive on the opposite side of the road. So I actually played the game, preparing myself to drive in California. So I got to California, I did the stuff, and I came back. And then obviously over the years, I continued to play it. And I noticed that each time they reinvented the game, its immersive qualities and its visceral nature improved. So in about 2010, I think San Andreas had a few little bits of litter in the street, but not much. And then when they did the Grand Theft Auto Online, you know, 2014, suddenly when you go to downtown LA, you know, well, Los Santos, which is this, you know, based on California, Los Angeles, you find litter, you find waste, there's nuclear radioactive material in the ocean. If you know where to look, there's kind of these, you know, the game designs are clearly very adept at using irony and using satire. So if you play that game now, you'll find lots of billboards in the game that talk about climate change, that talk about oil companies. They are using the narrative of the game to kind of almost sneak in aspects of popular culture that are resonating with us all, that we're all kind of aware of. And I just noticed that got even more and more important. And, you know, I literally started sort of filming it, taking photographs of it, and just just using that as kind of my visual playground. And of course, when they actually brought out Rockstar Director, I nearly fell off my chair when I suddenly realized that these programmers, these techno wizards, had made it so I can go into the game and I can create an avatar, and I can actually be in the game like a filmmaker, like a photographer, and I can actually roam and photograph and film. It was a big learning curve. And it is, that's what I noticed really. The things that were in that game, I was looking at 30 years ago when no one was really looking at it. When 30 years ago, I mean, SAS, we're noticing all the sewage and the shit and the panty lines and the tampons. And there are other artists for a long time who've made work out of recycled materials and looked at, ruins and all sorts of things. But those 30 years ago, that kind of stuff was all around us. And do you know what? It's all around us today. It's this, not much has changed. It's just increased. It's increased. There's more volume. There's more of it.
Yeah. No, there's just what you were saying there about kind of the subliminal kind of things that Grand Theft Auto do, and lots of people. There's a graphic novelist called Nick Hayes. He calls it smuggling stories.
Oh,
That's
right,
how he gets his sort of his message in there. Yeah, but I mean, I've got a couple of questions for both you and Chris in a little while, but I was just wondering about the footage there, because some of it is like, it's really old, isn't it? It goes back to 1944, 1945. Some of the stuff that you collected from there.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have rifled through so much stuff to.
I spent hours just looking through the Internet archives. I mean, basically, what I tended to look looking through a lot of America. It's the Library of Congress, basically. The world's largest library has thousands and thousands of millions of books and film clips. Some of it's copyright free, some of it's not. It's like it was quite a big task. But what I'm just in the process of, I've just applied for another funding grant to make a version 2. Whether or not I get it, I don't know. I don't know. It's a reasonable chance. But I've actually already started doing some research and finding some amazing footage about pandemics and about viruses. And this is from the 1940s. Again, this is what I think is interesting about the whole subject. Is it's really great when people make various films and everyone's kind of engaged, and we've got beach cleaners and all this stuff's going on, and there's all these campaigns and going on. It's all fantastic, but we just have to pinch ourselves and remind ourselves that while we think it's prescient and urgent and new, it's not new, and the road has been traveled for quite a while, and you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. And in everyone's amazing energy to try and solve the pressing problems, we really need to pay attention to what's happened in the past to know where you're going in the future. And I think often that's overlooked because it's not fashionable, and I've got some amazing footage from the 60s in New York of dumping waste, out to sea. And, you think, you listen to the conversations they were having, and I could take some of the conversations and the narrators from the 1960s, and he could splice them and he could put them next to Attenborough or someone else. And do you know what? They're saying the same thing. That's what we need to be worried about. If they were saying that in the 1960s and we're saying the thing now, well, what have we been doing for the last 40 years? Because it's quite hard to work that out. The same conversations. And I just think it's not trying to be negative. I just think we have to know where we've been. It's really worth looking backwards to help you move forwards. You can't just do that. You've got to take a look around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what you've been talking about as far as being creative and like finding creative ways to communicate this message, is key, isn't it? It's just as important to know where we've come from, but also about how we can find new ways to kind of get this across in whatever way that we can, isn't it? Whether it's through poetry or gaming or whatever it is, I suppose. I mean, we've got a few minutes left, but I just wanted to ask you if there was any kind of landmark moments for you, as far as maybe what kind of, a moment for you that sort of chose your journey. I mean, you've been described as a kind of an accidental environmentalist. So
That's
I guess
quite
was
cool.
there any point where it kind of you knew that this was the biggest issue in the world and this is something you had to do something about, or maybe other moments, because you've done exhibitions all over the place, and you know, has there been any moments where you've really touched someone as well, where somebody's been like, right, yeah, I get it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a few things. I mean, there's a couple of things I'd say. I mean, I sometimes get email. I mean, one standout thing, I remember getting this email from someone in California a couple of years ago, and it was just this random email. They were talking, they actually lived on the beach just out in LA, and they were just talking about all the seagulls eating the trash and stuff. And when I read it, it was a really lovely email. And I was in St. Ives at the time, and I could hear the seagulls squawking outside, you know, and St. Ives is quite famous for the seagulls, you know, taking people's passes and stuff. And it's really interesting, people that you've never met, you don't know anywhere, and they take the time to communicate with you. And then you suddenly find, you know what? You know, the place you're in and what you're thinking about is actually virtually, it's not the same, but you know that other people have got the same concerns. And that's always gives you great faith. I think thinking about what drives you, or what kind of like the standout moments, I'd say two things really. I've been thinking about it a lot recently, because me and Chris often have conversations about, you know, when you're trying to context what you've done or why you're doing it, and people asking you questions. I remember, because I grew up in a mining town in Yorkshire, when there were of course no mines there left, and I felt a bit weird last week when probably everyone who might watch this or hear this would have celebrated when the country, you know, has made an announcement last week that we know there's going to be no coal used to make energy, and that's fantastic. But you know, when I was in my 20s, everyone I knew worked in the coal industry, and when I go back there now, there's no new Green Deal in Yorkshire. There's no new green economy where I live. It's people on, you know, it's pretty hard going. So that change in economies doesn't get distributed equally, you know. So that post-industrial past that we're all trying to get out of, coal and carbon, you know, we're trying to move forward, but we can't. We need to move forward, and we need to take care of the people that have suffered from the carbon, as well as the future generations. And I remember walking across fields near where I used to live, and I'll never forget this. I remember walking across this sort of old coking factory, and the ground was almost shimmering with this green stuff in it. Now, I didn't know what it was, but it was almost like something out of The Wizard of Oz. You know, clearly the ground was polluted with something highly toxic. And it's just been around that muck. I always kind of knew that somehow that it wasn't right. It wasn't right seeing people have terrible lung diseases because of working down the mines. It wasn't right. My mum had a brain tumor that killed her eventually. You know, and you can't sort of say, well, it's because of this, but you can say things. I know that where I grew up, I found a recent paper actually, it's one of the most toxic it was in the 80s and 90s. There's a government report that says it was the most toxic areas to live in the country. We had coal, coking, chemical factories. Now, all those things aren't there now, but they're in other places in the world. They're in China. They're in, you know, other parts of the world. We've just moved the stuff. So that's where my interest about pollution always came in. And when I went to Cardiff and I learned to surf and met Chris and SAS and all those guys, it was like, it was so obvious. Mining community, South Wales, learned to surf. You know, there was shit everywhere where we used to live with muck, and then you go surfing and there's shit everywhere in the sea. And it was so obvious that you just had to like do something about it.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, thanks very much. There's some really good messages there, isn't there, as far as kind of not forgetting where we've been and sort of rethinking our economy almost in our society. There was a really good talk earlier from Ontgoy, who were based in the Netherlands, about sort of circular economy and kind of new ways of thinking about these things. I've got one, maybe two more questions for you, but it's just gone 5 o'clock. So if you hang around, and then we can with both you and Chris. But thank you very much indeed, Andy.
That's great.
Yeah, cheers very much, buddy.